دوستان عزیز درود بر شما و میریم سراغ Wolf's Perspective، یعنی دیدگاه گرگ. و این منطقه‌ای که مشاهده میکنید یه پارک ملی هست. حالا میگم چه ربطی داره. و مناطق حفاظت شده میشه گفت بهش، و داخل ایران هست این منطقه. و توی این مناطق حیوانات مختلف هستن و اینا. حالا میخوایم ربطش رو به این ببینیم چیه. میگه from the wolf's perspective this is clearly good news. از دیدگاه یک گرگ این یه خبر خیلی خوبیه به صورت واضح. But it also had beneficial effects on the ecology of the park, according to a study published in 2004 by William Ripple and Robert نمیدونم from Oregon State University. اما همچنین اثرات مفیدی در اکولوژی پارک داره بر اساس مطالعه‌ای که منتشر شد در سال 2004 به وسیله ویلیام ریپل و روبرت بسچا، فکر کنم از دانشگاه اورگون استیت، دانشگاه ایالتی اورگون هم میگن. In their paper in Bioscience، در مقالهشون در Bioscience، احتمالا اسم مجله است، the two researchers، این دو محقق showed that، نشان دادن reintroducing the wolves was، وارد کردن گرگ ها به، من قبلا هم گفتم introduce وقتی میگین یعنی یه ایجنتی رو دارین وارد میکنین داخل یه محیطی. الان مثلا اون پارک که بهتون نشون دادم برای ایران رو یادتون باشه، فرض کنید اینجا گرگ کم داره، اینا میرن گرگ رو از یه جایی وارد میکنن، شاید هم مثلا پرورش میدن، بعد اینجا زیاد میکنن تعداد گرگا رو، مثلا اینجا 100 تا میکننش 1000 تا، و اکولوژی اینجا رو حالا بررسی میکنن. حالا این توی ایران هستش، این عکسی که میبینین نوشته تپرشیا. این میگه reintroducing the wolves was، جای خالی، with increased growth of willow and cottonwood in the park. میگه باعث افزایش یعنی باعث افزایش رشد ویلو and cottonwood توی پارک شد. پارک وقتی میگه پارک شهر بازی نیست، پارک ملیه، مثلا اون منطقه بزرگی که من تو ایران نشون دادم یا تو آمریکا هم از این چیزا دارن. خب ویلو چی معنیش میشه؟ درخت بیدو میگن ویلو و شکلش هم این شکلی خوشگل هستش. عشق منه ویلو. کاتن وودم، کاتن که همون پنبه میشه، وودم یعنی چوب، پس میشه چوب پنبه، درخت چوب پنبه. و درختش هم حالا این شکلیه، مثل این که من تا حالا ندیدم. خب میگه که اینا گرگا رو وارد کردن داخل پارک، این درخت‌ها زیاد شدن. درخت‌های چوب پنبه و نمیدونم ویلو زیاد شدن، پس بید زیاد شد، چوب پنبه هم زیاد شد درختش. خب این ارتباط دارن یعنی دیگه، پس ببینیم کدوم میشه. ارتباط داشته میشه correlated with، اصلا with داره میشه correlated with. حالا بعضی interacted انتخاب میکنن، interact اینجا غلطه و دکتر ادم از دانشگاه سیدنی به همون توضیح خواهد داد، ولی خب مسلما ارتباط داشتن اینجا میشه از لحاظ علمی. Because grazing animal، میگه why، چرا؟ Because grazing animal such as elk یه نوع دیره، یعنی یه نوع گوز هستش. این در مورد گریز هم بگم، وقتی یه چیزی گراس میخوره داخل یه فیلدی به اون میگن گریزینگ، از گریز میکنه. مثلا cattle graze on the open meadows، مثلا هم علف خاریشونو داره میگه، علف خوردن. یا چریدن معنی قشنگ ترشه، graze چریدن. Because grazing animals such as elk were، جای خالی، sites from which they couldn't easily escape. میگه حیوانایی مثل elk یه کاری میکنن از اون محیط ها، سایت ها، وقتی نمیتونن با آسانی فرار کنن چه کار میکنن؟ were interacted claimed avoiding خودداری میکنن از سایت هایی که نتونن فرار کنن، چون اونجا گرگ باشه فرار میکنه دیگه. خب the scientist claimed ادعا کردن، یه ادعای دیگه ثابت که نشده. And as the woody plants and tree grows taller and thicker، میگه این درخت های چوبدار woody plants and trees گیاهان چوبدار میخوام و trees رشد میکنن بزرگتر و کلوفتر میشن. beaver اسم میشن. beaver یه نوع موش هستش اصطلاحاً و اگه شکلشو بخوام به شما نشون بدم بیور کلونیز میگن و این شکلی هستش. حالا بیور همیشه با کلونیز میاد، بیور کلونیز expanded، اینم باید یادمون باشه. و بی کلونیز به محیط هایی که ایجاد میکنن، بیور کلونیز، این ترکیب هم یادتون باشه. پس correlated اینجا هم avoiding sites from blah blah blah، اینجا هم claimed. بریم سراغ آدم.
Okay, so the reason I know this is about a real wolf is because in the second sentence it mentions ecology. So from the wolf's perspective, this is clearly good news, but it also had beneficial effects on the ecology of the park. So this is clearly about a real organism, a real animal. The difficult thing here is that we're starting in the midst of things. We're starting in media res. The paragraph obviously is connected to something else in a piece of writing that's come before, that's talking about wolves, that gives it its full context. So that's part of what's so confusing about this one. But yes, it's a real wolf, as in the animal. No, because they're talking about the ecology. In this case, it's not a zoological park or garden. It's a national park, or it could possibly be like an ecological reserve, something like that. So it's a large area of land that's been set aside as natural for nature. So national parks are the main way they'd be doing this. Because this is Oregon State University and the US has big national parks and wildlife system, I'm going to assume that it's a national park in the United States, and that when we get to the third sentence, we see that they've reintroduced wolves. So, and I'm guessing this is one of these projects where animals of a certain kind used to live in one part of the country, and their project is to reintroduce them to see if it solves certain kinds of ecological problems. Maybe in this national park, maybe there have been too many deer or other wildlife growing and there are no natural predators. So that could be why they've done this. So I'm going to say national park based on the full context. Once we get to the next sentence, reintroduction is something that you're not doing except in that kind of wilderness environment. Yeah, reintroducing because this is a place where there used to be wolves and they were killed off or hunted. And so what they've probably done is gone and found very similar wolves in somewhere like Canada where there's more wilderness, and they've brought them there. So it's the same species. They're not bringing in a wolf that wasn't native to that area. They're bringing in the same species, but they haven't got any of them nearby. So the reintroduction can't interact with the growth. The wolves could interact with their environment. The trees could interact with herbivore species, but so interaction, that verb, to interact, it's usually about entities interacting rather than with processes. Processes don't usually interact in quite that way, but measured processes can correlate. We see there are more wolves, and at the same time, we've noticed that there's more growth. So you could talk about the wolves interacting with the trees, although I don't think that they do. I think that what they probably do instead is they probably kill deer and eat those, and the deer then don't interact with the trees as much, so the trees grow. They eat the grass when there's grass, but then they start in the winter, they go for everything. And so I imagine what's happened is, so they mention elk, which is like a kind of deer. I imagine that they that they will eat like the tree saplings, like the
Mm.
small trees. And that when it gets to winter, they'll start to eat parts of the bigger trees if they have to. So I think that's part of what this means. And this is an ecological process. It means that there's indirect influence. The wolves influence some animals by eating them. Those animals then eat fewer trees, or they are less likely to go for trees. Maybe they're more likely to go to other places instead. Yeah, so then they say because grazing animals such as elk were avoiding sites from which they couldn't easily escape. So this idea is that there's growth there because the animals are choosing the safest places to eat. So if they go to the wrong place, they could end up, stuck somewhere where the wolves can catch them very easily. Because grazing animals such as elk were denied sites from which they couldn't easily escape, they're not denied them. They're choosing not to go to them. So the difference is the wolves don't stop them going somewhere, but they make it much more dangerous to go there. Whereas if you put a barrier, if you put a fence there, you could say that they were denied access to the site. If it's just wolves walking around, then what is more likely to be happening is that the elk are gradually changing their behavior because they keep getting eaten when they go to the wrong places. So it's not a full denial. In the park, animals can walk wherever they want, but some animals learn not to walk in some places. This is
Beaver colonies, yeah.
they talk about beaver colonies because beavers build these big dams that they live in. So they chew through the trees and then they move the wood around to make homes for themselves, safe places. And they usually stop bodies of water. They stop water from flowing. So they call them colonies, beaver colonies, because they often have many beavers in them and they've built them. It's just a standard way of describing the beaver living
Colonies.
habitat. That's how it's called a colony because they change their habitat and they live in it. It's a bit like a human house. It's a bit like a human colony because there's more than one person living there as well.
Yeah,
More than
great,
one beaver.
great.